We're here as part of the Hamilton College Jazz Archives, and we have with us one of the finest drummers in the country, Butch Miles. We just finished a burning set with the Paradise Valley Jazz Party musicians, and welcome.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
My first question is, how much weight do you lose every night after a set like that?
Well, it varies. Some nights I may lose a half a pound. I remember many years ago, though, when we were in France, we were playing the Grand Parade du Jazz in Nice, and I was with the Count Basie band. And for some reason, I weighed myself on a set of scales in my room before we went out. We played 2 sets that night outside. It was in July. And when I got back to the room, I stepped on the scales again for some strange reason, and I dropped 11 pounds.
Oof.
Wow.
It was just all water weight. But you could be sure that I was pouring liquid down my throat the rest of the evening.
2 sets of clothes for before the gig and after the gig.
Yeah. No, I usually, if I work real hard, I might drop 3-4 pounds in an evening.
Great.
You know, it's like I like to tell people that I'm from the Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson School of Drumming, but I'm from the Elvin Jones School of Perspiration. Because I do sweat a lot.
Something. Yeah.
I sweat a lot.
Were you a typical bang on the pots and pans in the kitchen little kid?
Well, kind of. Not so much the pots and pans. I did bang on everything else around the house. And when I was 9 years old, I talked my mother into buying my first drum. It was an old Lydian Ludwig parade drum. For those of you who are going to be watching this overseas, it's Lydian Ludwig. And I used to march up and down the street and just bang on that. And then a few years later, after I'd gone through a number of school bands, grade school, junior high, got into high school, then I sort of evolved over to a set. Became very fascinated and enamored with a drum set. And I talked her into buying me one of those, too. And of course, after that, I had everything set up down in the basement of our house. And my mother was working all the time, all day, and my grandfather and my grandmother were living there with us, and my grandfather had a job, which got him out of the house, and my grandmother was partially deaf, because I was down in the basement during during the summer school break. I'd be down there 6 to 8 hours a day practicing.
Wow.
Well, I didn't know any better. You know,
You didn't know that this wasn't fun?
Oh, I was having a marvelous time.
That's
this
great.
is great. I practiced everything. I practiced dynamics, I practiced tempos, I practiced various rhythms and Latin rhythms and dance rhythms and played along with records.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, if that was part of your training.
Who were some of the influential drummers that you listened to, that you liked at that time?
Oh, well, my first big influence was Gene Krupa. He was like the biggest influence on me. Right at the beginning, I was a huge fan of Gene's. I loved everything about him. Loved his style and his sound and his flair, his showmanship, and the way he would really put over a great drum solo. He would add that little extra pizzazz that just made me say, wow, you know, because a lot of times you see some wonderful musicians and they just look like they can't wait for the next taxi out of town. You know, they're not enjoying themselves or having any good time or communicating a lot that way with an audience. They let the music do all the talking. That's absolutely fine. That's wonderful. But I like to see a little show business thrown in there too. And then I was a very big fan of Joe Morello's and Louis Bellson, and a little bit later Buddy Rich. Once I began to understand what he was doing, what he was playing was way above my head. I couldn't understand it. And then I got into Roy Haynes. I loved Papa Joe Jones, Philly Joe Jones, Baby Dodds, Chick Webb. You know, the list is pretty endless. There's almost no drummer that I don't admire, living or dead.
Yeah. From that list, it's almost as if you went backwards in first listening to some like Krupa and then listening to guys that came even before him. Which
I had a starting point, which was probably the late 30s. And I moved on after that into the early to middle 40s, and then I really began getting interested in the early 30s and the 20s. And so I was moving in all sorts of directions.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of youngsters today, they'll start with maybe Elvin Jones or Tony Williams, which for them is going 30 or 35 years. And that's like the beginning of the history of jazz drumming, but you just have to work back further and further. And so I started with what I really enjoyed very much was with Gene Krupa. And like I said, Joe Morello and Louis Bellson and Buddy Rich and Papa Joe Jones, and just that was going in different directions as far as a yearly category, you know, was mentioned. So that's what I did. So I tried to embrace ultimately as many of the great drummers far back toward the beginning of this century and on up to somebody I might meet tomorrow afternoon or somebody that I heard play last week. And I love them all.
What was it that attracted you to that kind of music rather than
I have no
Sandy
idea.
Nelson and, you know,
Well,
Elvis
you know,
and-
there's no disrespect to Mr. Nelson. I just couldn't stand his playing. It was, sorry about the towel, still dripping. Does this come on the mic when I do that? Yeah. That's all right, you can clip it later. I started out on a drum set playing the most banal rock and roll. This was in 1959, 1958, and there was really nothing going on in rock and roll, I mean, exciting or creative, not like a lot of the wonderful, wonderful bands you've got now, and the great drummers that you've got now. It was all pretty cut and dried and very boring. But I was playing in a little rock and roll band back in high school, and then I joined the Musicians Union, and I started playing with dance bands, little groups around my hometown of Charleston, West Virginia. And maybe it was my mother's influence. She loved the great jazz from the World War II era, and she had some very nice records. And I just felt like this is too easy. This is rock and roll, boom, whack, whack, boom, whack. It just, there's nothing really to it. So I went to the best teacher in town. It wasn't the best teacher I could find. It was absolutely the best teacher in town. Wonderful, wonderful teacher, great drummer by the name of Frank Thompson. And Frank took me under his wing. He was a fine jazz drummer immediately and turned me in that direction. So I say Frank probably had so much influence on getting me into jazz rather than to, I don't know, bluegrass or whatever, which was on TV all the time. That was pretty terrible too. It wasn't until later on that I understood more about the music. I was able to actually recognize the excellence of some of these bands that I grew up disliking very much. And as I got older, I went back and listened to some of these bands, and I said, oh, well, these bands were great. What was I thinking of? It took me a long time to get into Duke Ellington's music. Basie, I was into right from the get-go, the second I heard the band, because it just hit me right in my heart, you know, right in that solid something right in here. It just said, this is it. Boom. Ellington took a little bit longer. And then I happened to see the Duke at a jazz festival in Cincinnati, Ohio. He had the whole band there. Bunny Briggs, the great tap dancer, was there. And John Coltrane was supposed to play a set either before or after Duke. Well, the sets were only 45 minutes long, and Train didn't show for some reason. So they asked Duke to play a double set, 90 minutes. And it was some of the fastest 90 minutes I'd ever sat through. By the time they were finished, I could not believe an hour and a half had already gone. I was enthralled, so I loved Duke's music, and from there on I started trying to check other big bands out, and that got me further, and I should say deeper and deeper into the that style era of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s.
Yeah. So
You played some with the Basie band?
4.5 years.
Tell us about that rhythm section, that Kansas City sound.
Oh,
How that
gee.
was different than
May I?
the East Coast or the West Coast. That Midwest kind of swing sound.
Well, yes, it was, where do you start?
who did you follow into? I mean, who was the drummer before you in the Basie?
Well, it's an interesting story. A young man had been hired by Basie by the name of Ray Perello. And he'd just been with the band a few weeks when he was in a very bad car accident in Chicago, wound up in the hospital, and Basie called me to come and fill in, which I did. Just originally, I think it was one of these week to 10-day things until Ray was better, but his injuries were more extensive than anybody thought. And by the time Ray was well and absolutely fit and ready to go again, I'd been with the band about maybe a month and a half or 2 months, and I was starting to get a little bit of newspaper notice, which never hurts. And so Basie gave me the job. Now here's the weird thing. Okay, Ray was with the band for a couple of weeks, and I jumped in. Then at one point we were playing with Sammy Davis Jr. We were down in Florida, down in Miami Beach, and my dear friend Duffy Jackson was working with Sammy. Then, after I left the Basie band, Duffy joined Basie, and Ray went with Sammy. So it was like all kinds of...
They call that musical chairs, right?
Yeah, with the same people, and that worked out really good. But the Basie rhythm section, that is just that is one humongous responsibility to think about, because first of all, and I love being here at this jazz festival with John Hurd, because when I was on the band 4.5 years, we had 3 bass players. They were all named John. It's John Hurd, John Duke, John Clayton. And John Hurd left the band for a while. John Duke came in. John Duke left the band. John Hurd came back. Then John left the band, and Clayton came in.
Wow.
So much that Bobby Plater, one of the writers of a wonderful tune years ago called Jersey Bounce, wrote a special solo for John Clayton called John the Third. Naturally.
Yeah.
But when I first started with the Basie band, it was John Duke, myself, and of course Freddie Green, Count Basie. And it was, I can't believe that I didn't actually maybe go slightly insane the first time I sat down to work with the Basie band, because the responsibility of the drum chair in that band is enormous. But I was young and foolish, and I was scared to death, you know, absolutely just frightened to death, because there was no rehearsal, no tryout. Basie called me on a Tuesday morning. I jumped on a plane and flew to Chicago, somehow got my drums and everything down to the Happy Medium, which later became the Jazz Showcase up on Rush Street, and is now in a different location, Chicago. Checked into the hotel, had something to eat, met with Mr. Basie, and showed up for work.
Wow.
And that was it. Well, you see, one of the wonderful things about something like that is that the leader of the band or the band itself will find out real fast if you can play, and real fast if you can't. You know, there's no if. I mean, you're not hanging around for 6 months until someone says, well, I don't think he's making it. You know, it's real quick.
John Hurd was telling us that his first night on the thing, and he said, what tune are we playing? And everybody in the band told him a different number. And he had to just like listen and see if he could do it, and apparently he did it.
Well, I had an enormous amount of help because sitting immediately on my left was the fabulous Al Gray. And have you talked to Al yet?
Yes.
Okay.
we had a great session.
Okay. Oh well, he saved me. I'll tell you right in front, Al Gray saved me, because no matter what intro Basie played, Al knew the number of the arrangement and would call out the number. And while Basie is doodling around on the piano, everybody's getting the chart up. And he saved me because, of course, I didn't know any of the numbers. And there were about 6 or 7 or 8 pieces that I had no arrangement on at all. But fortunately, I knew things like Jumping into Woodside, April in Paris, 1 O'Clock Jump, Whirly Bird, you know, a few of those. Molten Sway. I never saw arrangements in the book. I don't even know if there had ever been a drum part written for those. But Al Gray absolutely saved my life with every night for so long, until I learned a lot of the book and I didn't need the music in front of me anymore. Well, Al would call those numbers out. I don't think he ever got one wrong either. The memory was just amazing. It was incredible.
Well, I can imagine that would be like a not unfun position to be in. Like, he's playing this intro and you're going, no,
What?
no,
What
no.
is it? Well, later it became a very fun position to be in, because I knew all the intros,
Uh-huh.
and I knew most all the tunes, except maybe some of the new ones that we just recorded the day before, the week before,
Yeah.
or something. We were still all scuffling and learning ourselves.
Yeah.
But it was great. I could tell within 1 or 2 bars what the tune was going to be. But I'd still get them mixed up every once in a while. For some reason, I would get the drum breaks on Shiny Stockings mixed up in my mind with the drum breaks on Corner Pocket, and I'd play the wrong break.
Oh.
I don't know why. It would happen. I'd have a total lapse,
Uh-huh.
complete lapse of memory. You know, and just zoom right in there in the wrong place. But Basie never gave me a hard time about it. You know, he'd just look at me, give me a face. You know.
Was he a
I'm
good
sorry, Chief. I get it.
Was he a good boss?
Oh, he was wonderful. He was wonderful. He just, if I'd known we were going to do this, I would have brought a blue towel. I hope this is in color. He was a wonderful boss because he never told you what to do or what to play. I asked our road manager, band manager at that time, Sonny Cohn, and Cup sat right in front of me on the band bus. And after I'd been with the band about maybe 2 weeks, you know, I said, Sonny, you know, Basie hasn't said anything to me about whether he wants it this way or he doesn't want it that way. I said, because I'd worked with a number of other people who made it quite clear what they wanted and the way that they wanted it. Basie didn't say a word. And so Cup just looked at me. He says, well, if it's wrong, he'll tell you. And if it's not, he'll just let you go. And that was why he had great professionals in the band who took care of the business so well, because they were professionals. Basie didn't hire, you know, somebody that just turned 16 with an incredible reputation, but couldn't play.
Yeah.
So he did that one time. It was a funny story too. I can't remember if Al was still on the band at that point or not, but we had a trumpet problem, and somebody recommended a young trumpet player from Chicago. We flew into New York, and since we made it pretty much a point to not rehearse, there was no rehearsal again or audition. It was kind of like a closed shop. You got in there on recommendation, or if Basie had heard you play himself and wanted you to come in with the band. And I can't remember the young man's name, but he came in and he was all full of fire and brimstone. He was ready to show the world that he was like the greatest trumpet player in the world, probably like in his early 20s or something, although that doesn't have anything to do with it. And the night of his first gig with the band, he made the absolute mistake of thinking that Basie was a real cream puff, and he lipped off to him. Said something sassy or nasty.
Oh boy.
Right before the job. And I never saw this happen before. Basie fired him right then.
The guy didn't play a note yet?
Not with the band. Basie fired him right then, gave him his ticket home, and told him goodbye. He never did play a note. Not with the band.
Boy, oh boy.
He came in all, you know, he was hot, he had his hat on over to the side, yeah. No, it didn't work like that. The band was a very well-oiled machine, and it was a band. It was a big band. It was a full ensemble. Basie played the band like he played the piano. Right. You know, and it had to work like that. You couldn't have 18 and 19 superstars up there because it never works. So the band was as a unit, and it had to be that way. Oh, we had stars. Yeah, we had Jimmy Forrest. We had Al Gray. You know, we had Curtis Fuller at one point. We had Bobby Plater, Charlie Folks, a great baritone saxophonist. You know, various people that passed through the band from time to time over the years, but you didn't have anybody that ran roughshod through the band. Basie wouldn't stand for that. You know, just would not. And I never saw him get mad at anybody in the band except that one time. You know, he was a very affable, easygoing, wonderful man, and just marvelous to work for. But you didn't sass him. You did not sass him. One time we were playing a theater in L.A., and we were on stage, big production thing. Oscar Peterson was there, and Ella Fitzgerald and her trio, and so one night, let me see, who was it? I think it was Red Fox and Billy Eckstein showed up. And Billy got behind a curtain, And while we're out on stage and everything, and B is right behind the curtain, he's saying, Count Basie, Count Basie, now don't you still Count Basie? And Bass put up with this for like about a half a course or something. The band started burning whatever we were playing, and Basie got up from the piano in full view of the whole audience, walked over to the side of the stage where Red and Billy were behind a curtain, and proceeded to chew Billy out. Yeah, he says, don't you do that while I'm on stage. I wouldn't do that to you while you're on stage. Don't you do that to me. And then turned around, and both of them, like, we're sorry. We were just having fun. Wow. But I guess they cut Bass at a strange moment.
Yeah. Interesting. What, have you ever been on the gig when Joe Williams was a guest vocalist?
Oh, yeah, many times. Many times. He was wonderful. He is wonderful to work with also. Matter of fact, there's another bit of Basie memorabilia is that when I was in the band, it's the lady who was going to be and is now my wife. She and I decided that we were going to get married in Las Vegas because we were going in to play a stint with Tony Bennett at the Sahara Hotel for 1 or 2 weeks. And we all agreed, and her father had passed away when she was quite young, and so one of the closest friends we had was Basie, and so she asked him if he would walk her down the aisle. We got married at one of these little wedding chapels in Las Vegas, and he agreed. And then we asked Joe and Jillian Williams to be our seconds, and they agreed. So I can, in all honesty, say Joe Williams was my best man when I got married.
That's great.
It was wonderful. Sarah Vaughan was there, just all kinds of people. It was great. But yeah, I worked off and on with Joe many times with the band, and of course did all the wonderful stuff and Every Day and Rollin' Pete and The Comeback and a lot of all the great hits that he had with the band. Of course, I knew all of them by heart. I didn't need any charts on there, but it was really wonderful.
Who were some of your favorite arrangers for the Basie?
Oh, for the Basie band?
I mean, they had so many great ones.
There were some. Well, Neil Hefti. Neil Hefti was absolutely wonderful. Frank Foster was wonderful. Frank West wrote a number of things for the band. It was wonderful. Let me see. John Clayton wrote a few things for the Basie band that were great. So did Bobby Plater. And let me see some of the others. Sammy Nestico is just one of my all-time favorite Basie writers. He's one of my all-time favorite writers anyway. He's a great arranger, just marvelous. And so Chico O'Farrell did a number of things for the band that were just great. Unfortunately, we never played any of Oliver Nelson's arrangements when I was in the band. We played a couple of Thad Jones arrangements, which were great. They were really wonderful. But there were a lot of the charts from earlier days that I really wanted to play with the band. We never did. For instance, I was on the band 4.5 years. We played Cute one time.
Well, no kidding.
Yeah, I must have been lousy that night. Because over the years, I had my major drum solo was Whirlybird. And then we pulled out Summertime, which was an Eric Dixon arrangement, as I recall. It was a very fine arrangement. And then Dennis Wilson, who was playing trombone at that time, was writing some fine charts for the band, too. And he wrote a thing called Good Mileage, which was a big drum feature for me. But one night, Basie called Cute. I don't know where that came from, but we played it one time. Another one out of the 4.5 years that we played that I just loved was the Frank Foster chart on Blues and Hoss Flat. Played that one time. You know, so
4 years to pull it out one time. That's,
yeah. Well, at least I got to play it once. You know, with the band.
Yeah. Since the Basie band, what have been some of your favorite moments?
Oh, gee. There's a lot of them. I've got to tell you, because I left the band, God, 16 years ago?
Yeah.
1979. I hadn't thought about that, but since then I've gone and traveled all over the world and worked with a lot of great different people. It was funny, I never had a chance to work with Sweets Edison until after I left the band. You know, and then I started from time to time working with ex-Basieites. We kind of like, I don't know, just would conglomerate, get together. Clark Terry,
Yep.
magnificent. Red Holloway. I was with Dave Brubeck for part of a year and just had such a wonderful time with his quartet. As a matter of fact, when I left the Basie band, I went right with the Brubeck Quartet.
Can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Did you play a show with Dave Brubeck in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Sure did.
At the Brady Theater? Mm-hmm. I played in the orchestra behind you.
Oh, really?
The Brady Street Orchestra. Barry Epperly was the conductor.
Yeah.
I remember that night because I was impressed with your playing.
Oh, thank you.
One of my drum students, Tom Harden, who was in the percussion section, said, "Man, that guy set such an energy level."
Well, I used to do thank you very much, but I used to do a number of things. I tried to be original with Brubeck, but then, as you knew, every single night we would, sooner or later, we'd have to close with Take 5. They just would not let him out of town without playing Take 5. And so that was my big moment. And I used to do small little pockets of tributes to Joe Morello.
Yeah.
And throw some of those in there.
I always wondered how Brubeck felt about that he was such a writer, but the band's biggest hit, he didn't write.
Yeah, I know. Paul Desmond. Now, there's two stories about that. One that I heard, and I've never even actually asked Dave this, although Dave, I think, told somebody that Desmond had written that. But somebody else, and this is hearsay, absolute hearsay, but somebody else said that Dave had actually written Take 5, but he put Paul's name on it. Now, I don't know. But knowing probably, knowing how Dave is, the version that he tells is the correct one, so I'm sure that Desmond wrote it.
Yeah. Right.
But he was a great guy. I had no trouble switching formats from the roaring Basie straight-ahead big band style to the quartet, because the quartet was roaring also. It was a very strong quartet. Jerry Bergonzi was on tenor sax at the time, and Chris Brubeck was on bass, and also bass trombone, and it could zoom right along great. But I had no problem with the odd time signatures, because that was something else that I used to practice down in that basement when my mother and grandfather would work all day and driving people crazy. I drove so crazy that actually the people across the street from us put their house up on the market and moved. Whoa, I must be a big band drummer. I'm loud.
There goes the neighborhood.
Yeah, it sure did.
Yeah.
But working with Brubeck and the whole Brubeck clan was just absolutely delightful. And then after that, it's been very notable. I worked off and on for a few years with Lena Horne, who is one of my favorite all-time people in the world. Not only just as an entertainer, but as just a person. I love her, and there's just a ton of people. Worked with Jerry Mulligan off and on for a couple of years. Fascinating experience. I really dig Jerry. We've been good close friends for a number of years, and he was always remarkable to work with, because you never knew what he was going to do. Same with Lena. You could rehearse the heck out of something. I mean, have it down like this, and you get on stage and it's just, no, we're going to change that, we're going to change this, let's throw this over here, let's do a stop time. Then no, I want a little faster, I want a little slower. It's all of a sudden it was, well, what were we spending all those days rehearsing for? Now we're changing everything, but that's part of jazz.
Yeah.
That's part of jazz. There's one thing that Basie did not do a great deal of, was change things. Once that arrangement was settled the way it was, it stayed settled. And the solos would change. I mean, guys could change solos and do whatever they want, but if you had two choruses to make your statement, two choruses hit. And it stayed like that, but because that was, once again, it was a machine. It had to be like that. Otherwise, you'd have 18 anarchists up there on stage.
A couple people today said the same thing about the Basie band, and that was its ability to swing like crazy at a soft tempo. And that's got to be one of the hardest things to do, to really have energy, but playing so quiet.
Well, you have to keep the energy level very high, even when you're playing softly. Yeah. Because otherwise, if the level of energy comes down, then a lot of times maybe the volume would come down even further and the tempo might drop. But one of the trademarks I learned early on with the Basie band was that they had such a remarkable range and versatility in dynamics. I mean, the Basie band didn't just play piano, mezzo forte, forte, fortissimo, man. When you played soft, you played soft. And then when you came in loud, boom! It was like a bomb going off. And then you drop back down to nothing. You know, the band loved that. And one of the great arrangements was All of Me. You know, where Basie takes like the whole first half of the tune and then goes into right before the bridge, the band explodes and then drops back down to nothing again completely in just a split second. And it's not done with mirrors, and it's definitely not done with sound technicians with a board. You know, all these cats from rock and roll city with all the dials and everything, you know, saying, well, I think I'll make it loud now. No, I don't like it loud. I'll pull it back. We did it all naturally. All natural.
Great.
Because the band had, we had 3 microphones, generally, unless we were playing like some huge stadium with 30 or 40,000 people. 3 microphones. There were 2 down front for the soloist and 1 for Chief to speak on. Now, if we were doing a television or radio show, naturally that was different. Everything was mic'd to the hilt. But in regular concert, just 3 microphones. And Basie didn't like to have the piano mic'd. He liked playing it soft because people would, you know, start to listen like that, and then when the band would come in, you'd have that diversity of dynamics again.
Right. So you had to play to the level of that piano, on mic piano.
You had to be able to hear him. That's one thing Joe Williams told me one time, just what you're saying is that, you know, he said, if you're back here playing and he's out there playing and you can't hear what he's playing, you're too loud. So, well, Joe, you know, how about a monitor? So, no, you're too loud. You can't hear him. Even if he's 10, 15 feet away, you can't hear him. You're too loud. And that really stuck with me, especially since the Basie days, during the Basie days. But it was a great lesson to learn.
You know, I was going to say, I think you're giving some tremendous lessons here to a lot of younger musicians who just want to play loud and fast.
Oh, well, there are a lot of younger musicians who can play loud and fast. They play faster than me and louder than me, but that doesn't get it all the time. You've got to have some place to go. And how do you say that musically? If you start off loud and fast, that's it. What are you going to do after that? You just play loud and fast. So what? You know, show you 1,000 drummers out there right now, 10, 15, 20 years younger than I am, can play twice as loud, 3 times faster. But does it swing? You know, it doesn't make any musical sense. That was another thing that Basie taught. Boy, he would set some of those tempos we used to call right in a pocket, right in a slot. And it felt like it should be just a little faster or just a little slower, but it wasn't. It was right in there. And, oh, thank the Lord for Freddie Green. Because Freddie Green was just, boom, you know, Mr. Seth Thomas metronome back there. And he was just, now he was a whole education in himself. Of course, Freddie been with the band. I think when Freddie passed away, he been with the band like 50, 55 years, something like that. But the band would never have been, I feel, the Basie band without Freddie. You know, I mean, when Basie was still alive, it was just, it was such an integral part of the band. And even when Freddie, and he played unamplified guitar.
Right, it's almost like you didn't hear it unless it was like stopped. And then it would like, whoa, what happened? You know,
yeah, if he wasn't playing, you sure missed it.
Yeah.
But it added so much to the band and to the Basie sound. There were a lot of amazing things about the Basie sound that were very difficult. No other band has ever sounded quite like that. It's like no other band ever really sounded like Duke's band either. There were a lot of things where, let's say maybe the entire reed section in ensemble would play behind the beat. All 5 of them would play behind the beat, and when we'd come back, they'd come in together. Or the brass might have a quarter note triplet, and on one particular arrangement, it would be perfectly in time. On another arrangement, they'd lay back on it.
Well,
you know, or things like that.
Yeah.
Or they'd clip a note where sometimes you might figure a horn player would play the full value, they might clip it because that was the way that they were interpreting.
Yeah.
And Bobby Plater came up to me one time. We were playing, oh darn, I think it was Moten Swing. There's a, trying to remember if that is the arrangement. Now see, I'm getting these arrangements mixed up in my head, but there's a sax ensemble in the middle of one of those charts, which is just amazing. It's incredible. And they would start off smack on the beat, and then by the time they were into the first or second bar, they were behind and were phrasing behind, but all five of them were phrasing together. And boy, the first few months I was on the band, I wasn't used to that. You see, I was always used to this. It had to be played this way. That was the way I thought. It was I had like tunnel vision where tempos went. And Bobby finally came to me one day. He says, listen, he said, when we get to that section, don't listen to us. He says, lock in rhythm section, get that section this strong, says, and let us do what we're going to do. Because we're going to rely on you. If you start listening to us, the whole thing is going to start to go like this, like, whoa. He said, you can't do that.
Yeah.
We'll come back in right. He said, we'll get out of it just in time. But this was a Basie trademark. And I had to take that advice and burn it into my memory. He was absolutely correct.
Did you find that other bands either didn't have that flexibility or were afraid to let sections of the band fall back like that?
You know, that's a very good question. First of all, I never heard a band other than Basie that could do that. And I've heard bands that tried, but they didn't do it right. Maybe it was the combination of that was a specific Basie sound that had been born over so many years, and plus playing it so many times. I mean, we must have played, in 4.5 years, we must have played Jumping on the Woodside 4.5 years. I mean, there were certain things that you just could not get away from. You had to play, of course. As April in Paris was a great deal of Shiny Stockings, right. and always 1 o'clock jump. And it got to the point you could play that totally sound asleep in a coma, you know, with a religious person standing over you saying, you know, this is it, you're going to die. But first, the out chorus to 1 o'clock jump. And yeah, da, 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 da. You know, just go through the whole bit. It got to be like that. We were on the road in such close proximity to each other all the time that so many of us began to think alike on the stage as far as the ensembles and the Basie arrangements went. There were, let me see, there was 18 guys to band, a vocalist 19, and our band equipment manager, used to be called the band boy, but you don't say that anymore. Right. So that was like, 20 people, then a bus driver, but we never knew who the bus driver was because we didn't have a regular bus. Basie leased or chartered from Greyhound most of the time. So we had different cats who were driving and whatnot going around. But you might start off the day by getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to leave the hotel at 7 o'clock in the morning to make a 9 o'clock flight. So you've got to drive over to where the airport is, you know, everybody on the bus. Then everybody's sitting around the airport. Then you get on the plane, you fly somewhere, everybody's on the plane. Then you get off the plane, and many times you have to get back on a bus and travel 2 or 3 hours to the destination. Then everybody goes in and gets something to eat, then you show up, then you do the show, then more often than not, you pack up, and if you were lucky enough to have a hotel, then you'd go back to the hotel, and sometimes we'd get back on the bus and drive all night. You can make what we call the day sheet. If you drove all night, because we all paid our rooms and food, meals and all those expenses, basically paid transportation. And if you could skip the hotel or the motel for that evening and driving all night till you get into the next town, 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, then the day sheet changes and they'll charge you for that day. If you get in there at 1:30 in the morning, they'll charge you for that day and the next day. You know, sort of like 1:30 in the morning is still the day before, even though it's after midnight. So they changed that day sheet at 6:30. And many times we're just trying to save some money. The guys. in the band trying to save a few extra pennies, and we'd do what's called a hit and run. And you'd hit the town that you were going in, and then back on the bus and run to the next town. We had a lot of fun that way, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We had some very
Have some endurance too.
strange. Oh, yeah, wow. But you know, I've said this all my life. 4.5 years, blizzards, rainstorms, getting lost. Yeah, we got lost all the time. Bus drivers didn't know where to go, you know, and we couldn't tell them. That's what we hired him. You know,
Right.
Basie hired him for, get us there. Getting to places that we really didn't want to be, sometimes no food, sometimes no hotels, just a whole bunch of stuff. I never, ever, ever heard the band sound bad. Never. 4.5 years of one-nighters. They always sounded good. Many nights they were great, and some nights they were just unbelievable. And you never could figure that out. A lot of times you'd have 4 or 5 guys down with the flu, and everybody's tired and beat. You haven't had a chance to shave, and you're all kind of crummy and stuff like that. Band would roar, just incredible. Then there were you know, some nights where everything was fine. Guys were rested. It was a beautiful job, the whole bit, and the band was good. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't like that other night. You know, you can always tell the difference. Maybe I'm not on, you know, or somebody didn't make the note, or something doesn't sound right, or the rhythm section isn't really locking in for some reason. You know, I'm not locking in with Freddie and John, whichever John it might be. And there were just some nights like that, but the band always sounded good. It was such a pleasure. You know, I'm going to have to get out here. I have to get out of here.
I know. Got to get going. Got to get going. Just a word about this phenomenon of these jazz festivals. You know, these jazz parties.
Jazz parties.
It's like a great thing, I guess, for musicians. Do you like doing them? And
it is a great thing. This one's been going on here in Scottsdale now for 16 or 18 years. And some of them have dropped by the wayside, unfortunately. There were so many of them just a few years ago, let's say about 5, 10 years ago. There were so many jazz parties all around the country that a lot of people who wanted to go and hear this one, then wanted to go and hear that one, wanted to go hear that one, they couldn't afford it, or some of the parties would overlap. And the producers, the promoters, wouldn't work with the other producers and promoters to see if we could all come to some sort of nice agreement as when you're going to have yours. Well, last year I had it this time. It was big successful. I'm not going to change it just because so-and-so's having one same time. And a few have passed away. Dick Gibson's jazz party, he's the granddaddy of jazz parties. He invented the jazz party. That one is rumored to maybe starting back up again. You never know. Dick started the whole thing, I think it was in Aspen, and then moved it on down to Colorado Springs, and then in later years up to Denver. And that hasn't been happening for a few years. Then there was the Santa Fe party, which ran for about 5 years. That's gone. And then there's a couple of other parties around the country that have hung on for 10 or 15 years and struggled as hard as they could, and have done well, but then finally just said, no, we just can't do it anymore. We have to cancel. You know, for whatever reason. But thank God there's still a number of these wonderful parties around the country that we get a chance to play at. And I get a chance, I think maybe if you ask some of the other guys, they'll tell you the same thing. We get a chance to see each other every once in a while. You know, and sometimes you may not see some of these guys for 2 or 3 or 5 years. And then you have a chance for a couple of days to get back together and play and enjoy your company and tell lies and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun, though.
Real quick.
Okay.
Are there any other venues on the way up for the young lions? Places for them to play, things for them to do that authenticates the music and makes the music one with the culture? And if so, if not, what can be instituted?
Well, that is a good one. There are different ways of getting your education, your musical education, from the way I did, starting out and playing just in dance groups and dance bands and after-hour joints where you played in a club that couldn't buy liquor by the drink. It was illegal. And you'd have to go in there. Everybody would fall by midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock for jam sessions. But there's a lot of different opportunities out now for a lot of the, like you say, young lions. Some of these jazz parties, some of the jazz promoters hear some of these people and say, man, just, you know, this guy is really great, but nobody knows who he is. I want to have him, pardon me, or her, for my party. Bring them out. Other people get a chance to hear them. Some of the promoters like George Wein and others. George is still involved naturally with the JVC Jazz Festival in New York, and he does some scouting around the country and hears a lot of people, loves to hire some of these guys like Nicholas Payton, fantastic young trumpet player out of New Orleans, you know, or Wallace Roney, or some of these, you know, other people, and bring them out, give them exposure. There's different places to play, especially in the European market. We do a lot of traveling overseas. I was over in Europe last year, I think, 4 times. 4 or 5 times, I can't recall. This year I'll be in Europe, 2, maybe 3 times, and in Japan also.
Wow.
So there is some hope out there. They still have a lot of clubs. A lot of the nightclubs and entertainment areas around the United States have just gotten too expensive. People can't afford it, or the overhead is very high. Where are these people going to play? But Buddy Rich said at one time, years ago, someone asked, he says, Buddy, we've got so many of these wonderful players coming out of the colleges and universities. He says, where are they going to play? The clubs are all drying up and nothing's happening. What are they going to do? And Buddy said, the cream always rises to the top. You know, but I run into a lot of people who said, yeah, I used to love to play music, or I played jazz or something, but that was 25, 30 years ago, and then I graduated from college and I got married and I got the job, and I said, boy, I sure am sorry I stopped. And I said, well, I'm sorry you stopped too.
Yeah.
But don't bitch to me about
Wasn't
you
that
stopping, you know. I
important?
said, I got out of
Right.
college, I got a job, I got a family. So I had to quit playing. No, you don't have to quit playing.
Right.
You see a whole lot of people out there that didn't quit playing either.
Yep.
So you just, and it is tough. It is tough. You have to stick in this business because it'll kill you. Just waste you away and then turn around and make your life so marvelous. You can't believe you ever thought of a rainy day as everything is sunshine and beautiful blue skies. And then maybe the next day you're back with clouds and thunderstorms.
Right.
I'm just using a weather analogy. You know,
It does have its highs and
just
lows.
like life anyway. Yeah. But you really have to, I think if you want it bad enough, you've got to stick with it very, very deeply. I stuck with it long enough. See, I didn't join the Basie band until I was 30. And I'm 50 now, and it was incredible. Everybody says, wow, you were a young kid when you were with bassists. No, I wasn't a young kid. I had a young face, and I weighed about 10 pounds less than I do now, and I dyed my hair because we had one of those things. My hair bleached out about the 2nd or 3rd month I was on the band, and I started getting some press, a newspaper thing about the young blonde white drummer with the Basie band. I said, aha, young blonde white drummer. I can use this. So, you know, for years, L'Oreal and Clairol were good friends of mine. And it worked.
Yeah.
I was the
I
young
remember the
blonde
picture,
white
yeah.
drummer instead
Yeah.
of the young white drummer. So that worked along too. But I stuck with it for, well, let me say, I've been playing now professionally. It's pretty young compared to some of these great giants in there. I've got my first musicians union card 35 years ago, and I started playing on a drum 6 years before that. So I've been playing 41 years, or I've had something to do with drums for 41 years. And like I said, when I went with the Basie band, I was already 30 years old, and sometimes that's a little late. You know, people think, well, if I haven't made it by the time I'm 30, I'm just going to give it up. I never thought about quitting. Never ever thought about that. I thought about killing myself, but I never thought about quitting. Well, you know, it's sometimes you just say, oh, but I never ever once said, I'm going to give it up. I love it too much.
Great. Well, we're glad you didn't.
Well, thank you.